Welcome back to On the Light. In today's episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with Stephanie Quirk. Stephanie shares the story of her first Iyengar yoga class and the deep, lasting impact it had on her. Stephanie's journey took her to the Iyengar Yoga Institute in Pune in the early 90s, a visit that turned into a 2-decade stay. During that time, she gained a rare depth of insight into how the Iyengars taught and how Guruji approached his practice. In our conversation, Stephanie offers reflections on those teachings, along with personal stories and memorable interactions she had with Guruji. I'm delighted to share this rich and thoughtful conversation with you. Please enjoy this episode of On the Light. Hello, Stephanie. How are you?
Good. Yeah.
Good. Thank you for meeting with me. The first thing I like to ask is I'm always interested in what brought you to Iyengar Yoga.
As a child, when I was probably about 14, 15, my mother managed to convince the whole family to go to a yoga class. It wasn't Iyengar, it was another one. This was in New Zealand. And we all went, and I probably attended about 3 times, and then I sort of said, don't know that I'm really into this. I prefer to do other things. Uh, but there was still that it had actually come right into the family level, if you get what I mean. It's as my sister later became an ordained Buddhist meditation, and so too with my mother. So this was part and parcel of the way of viewing the world, but it wasn't really what I was up to. It wasn't until I was in my 30s, early 30s, about 32, that I was in a state of being constantly tired and fatigued. I was working a job where I was doing psychogeriatric nursing, and I had to be on duty. I had to get up at 5 in the morning to get across to the hospital to be on duty in time and all that. And I just sort of I was just recognizing how tiring and kind of worn down I was from this job. And I just made a spontaneous decision and handed my notice in. I gave 2 weeks or something. And that night I told some friends, and one of them said, "Oh, good, you can come to a yoga class." I started going to these yoga classes. They were Iyengar yoga classes. And I said, "Oh, I don't know," because I was never into any kind of physical. I used to swim. I used to do a lot of swimming as a kid. And as a family, we used to do trekking over, in New Zealand, if you're going to go trekking, it means mountains. And we used to also do skin diving, that kind of thing. But I really wasn't into physically testing my body against anything. These were the activities that we did. So I said to my friend, "Oh, I don't know, yoga, it sounds a bit tough." And she said, "Look, I'll tell you what, underneath the yoga school on the ground floor, there is a cafe, and we can go and have a coffee and a cigarette before we go up." And I sort of thought, "Oh, okay, yeah, let's do that, and we'll see. We'll have a cigarette and a coffee first, and then we'll go up to this yoga thing." So I would say that coming into Iyengar yoga, so by this time it's 15 plus years on from that early childhood experience. And we did that. We had a coffee and we went upstairs. And my friend had said, "Look, I'm going to suggest you come on a particular week." So the week we're going was the week where they just did a lot of very quiet resting poses and some breathing. Okay. So that's how she explained it to me. And so I went to this class. I got to lie over bolsters. I got to put ropes around my legs. And I had a kind of easy, soft, flexible body, so taking the hands down to the floor wasn't too much of a problem. But still, these were positions I've never been in before.
Mhm.
And opening the chest over those big, heavy Puna bolsters, and also, Lordy B, going upside down on a chair. Sitting on a chair and then swinging your shoulders back down onto the floor, your legs up in the air. And
Yeah.
I came out of that absolutely shaken, not frightened, but energetically, like as if I'd been given a frightening kind of charge. I
Mm.
wasn't hurt. I had no physical remaining aspects of that. And whoa, did you see the way we had to lie over those spots? Did you see the way we had to do this? This is what I
Mhm.
was saying to my friend. I got home and I bumped into my mother at one stage and my sister, and they said, "Oh, how did your yoga class go?" And I said, "Oh, we had to do this and we had to do that, and they make you do this and they make you do that." And I was so emotionally charged and stirred up.
Mhm.
We went off to the movies that night, and after the movies, I was still anyone I could tell about this thing
Oh,
that we had to
wow.
do.
Yeah.
I was telling them all about it, and then bing, I heard myself.
Mhm.
It's like, whoa, that got you. I
Mhm.
had enough sense to recognize that got you.
Yeah.
And perverse mind that I have, I made up my mind that without telling my friend, I would sneak back because this was a Friday, I would sneak back the next Monday to the class. And it was a drop-in midday class, usually only an hour and 15 minutes or so. Of course, the next week it was standing poses.
Yeah, right.
Oh, Lordy B, was that, like my body had to exert itself in so many ways. In
Mhm.
some ways, doing that physically with the body was much more opening and dynamic energetically
Mhm.
than just lying over a bolster was.
Mhm.
So, yeah, for that bolster session, I was all on about the bolsters. Came out of this really absolutely kind of like zapped,
Yeah.
zapped with 2000 kilowatts of energy. I was buzzed. I was in a state of bliss all afternoon from that experience. I was
Mhm.
just as if I'd been on some medication. It
Wow.
was a very strong, energetic turnaround. I thought, oh. So I went back to the next one on the Wednesday, still hadn't told my friend. It's like, wow, there's something here, isn't there? And again, it was standing poses. Oh, okay, and this kind of thing. And then I met up with my friend and I confessed to her that I'd actually been 2 times in the week already. And I was kind of like, by this time I was getting a bit speechless. I told her I'd been 2 times in the week, but I was a bit kind of, oh. So the next week I went every day of the week
Mhm.
and I proceeded to go every day of the week. And then that teacher recommended I go to her teacher's intensive. Now, I was only 1.5 month old yoga baby, but she did manage to get me up on top of my head.
Okay.
Yeah, I did manage to get Shirshasana in that time. But, with her taking me up.
Sure.
And so then I went to this intensive. And then I was maybe about 2.5, 3 months later, I was coming back from time away in the country. And I was so keen to get back to my yoga class. It was like all my mind was full of. And, I'd become a fanatic in a very short space of time. And I came back, I went to my first yoga class. My body just popped up to its first ever Urdhva
Oh,
and
wow.
I was then super buzzed, super high on that. And I fell down some stairs and I was in hospital. And
Oh
I
no.
completely dislocated my right foot. And basically, the rest of my yoga journey is being partially disabled because a dislocation in the foot, subtalar, basically my leg bones sheared off from the
Hmm.
foot bones. So it was a long recovery to get back. I was in a plastic cast for a long time and then getting back. So it's like across that gamut is my introduction to Iyengar yoga.
Hmm.
It's to me has all the traits of being what in India they would say, well, that's karmic,
Hmm. Yeah.
such a kind of an unraveling series of events. To say it was specifically Iyengar, I knew it was Iyengar. It actually is quite interesting. At the end of that first week, I went off to the Adyar bookshop because I was going to get a copy of Light on Yoga. I was going
Okay.
to, so I could have a copy of Light on Yoga, and they didn't have any. They had run out, but they did have Light on Pranayama. So I knew how to do digital pranayama by the end of the next week.
Oh my gosh, Stephanie.
You see, I wasn't in the system. I wasn't in the training thing.
Sure.
I
Yeah, yeah.
hadn't yet heard about the rules and regulations. I just had what I would say is my great fortune of just being able to roll through those early steps.
Hmm.
It wasn't kind of like organized and structured for me.
Right.
It was just purely based on my energy and enthusiasm and
Hmm.
nothingness. And then I faced a big kind of obstacle, just rose up against it. But I kind of stuck with the whole healing process and kind of got back to yoga on a crutch, still on crutches. And at that point, because of the injury to my foot, the teacher I'd been going to study with actually recommended I do go to her teacher to study from here on in. And it was then I got to Pune for the first time. I started to read the book and we started to understand things about, alignment and about the precision in Iyengar yoga and actually proper the names and the practice of pranayamas. And by the time I actually went to Pune for the first time, I was a 5-year-old yogi.
Okay.
Mm.
Well, that's still young.
It's still young. It's now these were early days.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And they
where,
allowed that then because I know when I first went, you had to have, I think, 6 years.
yeah, I don't know what it is now, 8 maybe. Well, it was 8 for a period of time. So that's how that was my uh, baptism into Iyengar yoga. I don't know about introduction, but
Hmm.
it was like that. It was everything about it was very strong, both the radical energetic change as well as the having to encounter and face that obstacle. I've done all of my yoga with a kind of like a radically damaged right foot,
Hmm.
which over the years, so in that first visit, I then went on to the UK, but came back 2 years later. So in 94, I came back to India and asked if I could stay there to study for a long time.
Hmm.
So from 94 onwards, I was pretty much, India was my base. Apparently, I had a situation where there was another teacher. This teacher told me about this conversation she had with Gita, in which she had said to Gita, "Oh, I do wish I could do what Stephanie was doing and is able to do." And apparently, Gita's reply to her was, "You don't have Stephanie's karma."
Mm.
Mm.
That's
Now, I don't know if that meant Gita was pointing to like the injuries and all that kind of stuff, but that I was a Westerner who actually basically I'd won a compensation case because of the damage to my foot.
oh.
So financially, I invested in a flat and I had a tenant in there, and so financially I was able to sustain myself. I mean, at that time India was a whole lot cheaper than living in the West, but it wasn't for free. You still had to,
Mhm.
it still cost. Um, And so I was able to do that. Mm.
Oh, wow. Okay. I always
So
wondered how.
in a way, yes, certain bundle of karmic kind of propensities that just,
Uh-huh.
all it was bundled.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think that makes a lot of sense because it sounds like it just sort of grabbed you and instantly you were kind of on a fast track in a
Mm,
way. Yeah.
mm.
Wow. And so can you recall your first interaction with BKS Iyengar?
My first interaction with him, yeah, yeah, for sure. So in the very first visit, which was 91, 92, I was when I wasn't in a class, I was watching a class, observing, and including the therapy classes. I
Mhm,
just went into general classes. I didn't go into the therapy class.
mhm,
I said to my teacher before I went, "Do you think I should tell them about my foot?" And she said, "They're going to know everything there is to know about your foot just watching you cross over the floor once."
mhm, mhm,
Um, so you decide, and I decided to just go because I went with a group of friends, and I decided to just go into the general classes. I was sitting on the side, and there was a an assistant who'd been there for a long period of time, called Azita, and Azita had come off her scooter, had a scooter accident, and had a broken collarbone. And
mhm.
so Geeta said to Azita, "Tell that girl to help you in the therapy class." So there I was, getting the blankets and the bricks, running around the room, a bit like a startled sheep caught in the headlights of a car.
Yeah. Yeah.
And was right at the end of maybe the second or third time that I was in the medical class. It was right at the very end of the class, and as often in Pune, you'll find an awful lot of people are in Setubandha Savangasan at the end of
Mhm,
a class.
mhm.
And so I had to put somebody into Setubandha Savangasan. Mr. Iyengar strode up to me. He didn't say anything about the position that the person was in, but he kicked the bench and he said, "It's not straight." Ah, it's like, pay attention
Uh-huh.
to everything.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I have to tell you, my first time in India, in Pune, I was in my very first class with Geeta, and the travel, the sleeping in a different bed. I came to class that day with a stiff neck, and Geeta, there's a sea of 80 students or whatever in the class, and she said, we were sitting in swastikasana, help that girl with her neck, she said. And she was talking to you, and you came over and helped me with my neck. I don't remember exactly what you did, but it was some sort of adjustment to help me sit
Well,
straight.
yeah,
But it
okay.
was a very impressionable moment for me because, Geeta could see everything, and that was
Yeah.
just amazing.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
Actually, that there's all kinds of symbology about the architecture of the institute. But one thing is that the teacher positions himself in the middle of the room, and in the middle of the room you can see an awful lot of people. If it
Hmm.
was a square room, you can't. There are corners blocked off to your sight.
Uh-huh.
Because of that fan shape that opens out in front of the teacher, you
Yeah.
actually get to see more people.
Hmm.
And it was this very interesting. It took me years to kind of like figure out some of their hidden teachings. And one of the things was it took months and months and months and years to recall and to remember, the first class, or it's a standing pose class of the month,
Hmm.
when there's a new pile of unknown bodies, Western students turn up, we always end up in Uttanasana forever and ever and ever. And so I remember one time when that was the situation and I was assisting, I went to stand next to where she was to see what she was seeing. And she was really casting her eye around. She was really looking backwards and forwards and around people. She was checking everybody's spine, how everybody's spine was in Uttanasana.
Wow.
She knew
Oh,
everybody by
mhm.
that stage.
She knew everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Amazing.
yeah.
So was Guruji teaching at that time?
No, he had pretty much retired from conducting classes,
Mm-hmm.
but he was still conducting special sort of, celebrations. Um, so I turned up there in 94,
Mm-hmm.
and in 98 it was his 80th birthday, and he taught the his 80th birthday celebration teachings.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the year, what was it, 2000, I think, or can't quite remember, he taught Institute celebration teaching.
Mm-hmm.
He was still being invited to travel and teach overseas. China was one of the last ones of those, uh,
Mm-hmm.
from my memory. But there was one time when he taught uh, up in Rishikesh
Mm-hmm.
for the tourism board up there, and he said, "I'll bring my Western students under the condition that it be kind of advertised." So what happened was, after Rishikesh, everyone went back to Pune, and we got to attend. He taught a pranayama intensive for a whole week.
Oh, wow.
Really extraordinary experience. Yeah. Mm,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And I mean, Gita was doing part of the teaching up in those intensives up in Rishikesh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but he wasn't conducting the regular classes in the institute by then. It was wholly taken over by Gita and Prashant and some of the other teachers upstairs, like Shah,
Mm-hmm.
Pandu. Yeah, they were
Okay.
doing teaching. Yeah.
Hmm.
Oh, but I mean, having said that, practice time was when he would do a lot of his teaching. And that was quite a regular occurrence, especially if it was some of his teachers that he had known by that stage. He's past 80 by this stage, and that he'd, consequently known for a long period of time. And so, he almost couldn't resist himself to call them out, to give them a teaching, in which, and we're all there glued to what he was teaching to them, because he wasn't, he wouldn't make it an exclusive thing. It was, yeah, you can come and watch and see what I'm teaching that student. Every now and then he would teach the student in Marathi or in
Mm-hmm.
Tamil. Actually, when he was teaching Abhijata, which was in the last couple of years of his life, he was intensely teaching Abhijata. And at times, most of the time it was in English. He let it be available for anyone to attend to what he was teaching her. But every now and then that he would break into Marathi. Not Marathi, Tamil,
Okay.
it's their mother tongue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Mm. But no, it was pretty open.
Yeah.
So, yes, my experience of him is that as he aged, he just altered his modality of teaching. At the Silver Jubilee teaching was in a facility. There was another one which might have been his 85th 85th or something teaching, where it was in the institute, and
Mm-hmm.
it was actually up on the platform. And he had, instead of it being the situation where all the students gathered were also on their mat following, doing their poses, they
Uh-huh.
were sitting and watching and observing, and he ran it like a seminar.
Mm-hmm.
And he explained why he was doing this and the reason behind he was doing that, rather than instructing someone through the or instructing the room through the poses,
Mm-hmm.
rather than it being a broadcast to everyone on their sticky mat. And so, to a certain degree, a certain amount of directed in wording to get a group of people to do the same thing together. that he then brought his finer teaching into. But when he did this one up on the platform in Puna, it was really his chance where he didn't need to actually guide or move those people in the room.
So how many years did you live in Pune then?
To start off with, there's always a visa thing, and I I was on an Australian passport, and I used to have to leave the country after 6 months. Now,
Mhm.
I could do that by crossing the border to Nepal, or I'd go home to Australia. Then I discovered it was actually Mira Mehta who told me about the Ayurveda studies that could be taken by a Westerner, which gave me admission. And I sort of thought, well, that's good. That's pretty in line with yoga. It gave me admission to a university. And as a admission to a university, I could get a year's visa. I didn't have to leave the country for a year instead of
Oh,
6 months. Yeah.
huh.
So I did that. I did Ayurveda courses for about 4 years. And then I actually started traveling and teaching. And for a year or two, the trips away to teach coincide. I just actually organized them around when I needed to get another visa.
Mhm.
And then I discovered that I have dual nationality. I was born in New Zealand, but
Mhm.
I've actually got citizenship in
Oh.
Australia,
Mhm.
but you can hold both passports.
Mhm.
You can
Mhm.
hold dual nationality. And I discovered that the New Zealand passport allowed me a 5-year multiple entry visa.
Oh,
Yeah, so
better.
it was limited to 6 months stay, but I
Mhm.
didn't have to keep on reapplying for
Mhm.
another 5 years. I
Mhm.
literally could go to Nepal and back.
Mhm.
Just had to step outside of the country and back in. But I actually, it just did make it easier that I didn't have to keep reapplying. I did used to, consequently go out to teach and then come back into the country. So I didn't start traveling and teaching. I didn't start doing that until I'd been in Pune actually for 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah. Then I started, people invited me to come and teach. And then one thing led to another, and that grew. Yeah.
So you didn't have any formalized teacher training like some,
No,
yeah.
no. I
And
had intensive teacher training.
sure. Did you feel like when you started teaching, it just came naturally because of all the experience that you had there at the,
It was quite interesting. I mean, as and this would happen every time. It was a very interesting cycle of going on.
Mhm.
See, you're not just there to learn what they teach, you're
Mhm.
there also to learn what they're trying to teach you. There's a
Mhm.
bit of a difference.
Mhm.
But you're not an observer reading from the billboard of Gita Iyengar, like,
Mhm.
reading, oh, she's teaching this, she's using this language, she does that pose next.
Right.
Um, it's actually, they have a fair influence into what you're doing and how you're doing it. A high demand in terms of whether a thing is straight, whether the timing was correct, and so on and so forth. And what would happen, and this became noticeable after a couple of trips, it kind of blew me away the first couple of times. I was devastated, was I'd go away and teach, and then I would return to Pune. They would always, when I turned up, when I first saw them, they were always so, happy to how are you, and are you well, and how did you go? They didn't want to know the details of how I went. It was just that kind of are you well? And
Mhm.
then I would turn up the next day to assist in the therapy class, and they would just wipe the floor with me. They would totally take me down.
Mm.
I would end up in the evening feeling that I was just clueless, that I
Oh,
really didn't know anything. And it was very harsh.
yeah, I bet.
They would just take that any sense or any sense of pride in what I had done.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd gone off and I'd taught several workshops and I'd managed it and I'd managed to teach this and teach that. And they would just remove that pride from me.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be just an ignorant student,
Mm-hmm.
not knowing anything.
Mm-hmm.
That was the feeling.
Yes.
And so when I'd go away and teach again, so it's a bit different. This is what I say. No, I didn't have like the teacher training process in the West. It was a much more intensive one. And so when I'd be on a flight going overseas to teach again, I'd be kind of like, I was going to teach and just like having this experience of being totally ignorant. And I would do the invocation and I would stand up and it would just come out of me.
Mm-hmm.
And to some degree, I've never had to really plan out pose by pose by pose
Mm-hmm.
what I'm going to teach. I have thoughts like I have a good sense of I really need to go into this category of asanas and work through adaptations with this or that, or with a particular mental attention on different aspects of yoga. Instructing point by point by point was not what you're being, what's the word, educated, it's civilized in Pune.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, so that would happen every time I came back. That pride of accomplishment would just get taken off me.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just feel, and then I twigged that this happened every time. And I think when they must have seen that I had figured out this is going to happen every time. I
Okay.
must have walked in already a bit, you know, open to what it is that I might learn from this situation. Not walk in the door, with some kind of label, unknown label above me saying, oh, I've just come back from overseas. There was just ping. It was just, I had finally learnt the reason why you're here is not because of where you've just come from now at all. And it's inevitable because, we, since a child, we've been told to work and give effort to accomplish things and so on and so forth. But actually, that doesn't turn you in on yourself, and it doesn't take you to that inner body. A couple of memorable times, probably at times I directly with him was his assistant on certain patients,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, he. So yeah, he would tell me to get a box, get this, get that. He wouldn't tell me what he was doing and why he was doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know what the condition the person had. At the time I first turned up there and was assisting, there were no lists of paper. The Iyengers had memorized, knew everybody's sequence.
Wow.
It was only later when there was a transition that happened. More and more Westerners wanted to assist, and also they were trying to encourage the Indians to come on board. And what they recognized was they actually started to pay the Indian students to come on board. And basically, because it's not such an easy thing to have that much spare time
Mm-hmm.
to come and assist in the classes. So they actually, for the Indian population, they're not all walking around with the kind of income that could send you to a foreign country to learn nothing like yoga, like we
Mm-hmm.
have.
Right.
It's different economics for them, of course. So they paid them, and that made a big difference to the Indian students turning up, and they would not just come and assist, they would come and practice and learn and be in the classes. It was a big turnaround. So there was big bigger numbers of assistants in the room, and that's when Gita would start writing these lists of the
Oh.
sequence of poses and a little bit about the condition of them. And it was kind of like, I actually had the great fortune of sitting in on some of the interviews where she would take a new student for therapy. She would have them come to see her. So, but before then, it was a lot of I could say a lot of my training is a lot of unknowing, a lot of witnessing and experiencing,
Mm-hmm.
but without the information, whether it be on a piece of paper or whether it be that Mr. Iyengar or Gita would tell me, oh, they have this condition, that's why we're going to do these poses, but none of that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just walking around constantly feeling that you don't know was the teaching. And until I went teaching myself, and then it all comes out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in actual fact, that you don't need to learn by being instructed by someone the whole time.
Right.
There are many ways by which we are actually learning. And of course, was it a great quote from Gita that comes up on social pages sometimes, which was, you don't need a guru to teach you the secrets. It's your practice that will teach you the secrets. That's exactly it. That is exactly it. There were some times, I can remember quite vividly one time, because of my wrecked ankle, wrecked foot, Padmasana was very difficult for me because it was too much pressure on when it put the foot up on the thigh. It was a difficult pose for me. I remember one time it was towards the very end of practice, and he was not far from me, and he saw me kind of working with one foot, taking it in and out, trying to do this. And then I kind of looked up, and he saw me, and he just caught my eye, and he just carefully and deliberately put one of his foot on top of his thigh and looked at me, and oh, okay, I got to do this.
Oh, wow.
So I put my foot up on my thigh, and then he put his foot up on his thigh, Padmasana, and I'm done, and then the other way. Not a word between us.
Wow.
I just had to watch him and follow him.
Yeah.
Where he held the foot, the knee, how he moved the thigh, how he placed the foot, how he shifted his body weight, this kind of thing. Not a single word. The thing, he waited, there was hardly anyone around. It wasn't that he was trying to single me out, it was just more a case of there's hardly anyone around. He could see me struggling.
Yeah.
This is what you need to do. And it was follow me.
Yeah.
And so the thing that got me there was, the point was to just follow him. No questions asked, just follow him. And it was, so the thing that helped the ankle and the knee and hip rotation and all that kind of stuff was a thing called faith, belief, trust.
Absolutely.
That's what oiled those joints.
Uh-huh.
Having someone tell me, oh, try this, if you do this with the knee, or if you turn the foot that way, or something, whatever,
Sure.
that doesn't give that faith trust.
Right.
So it was an unspoken dialogue that happened.
It's
And
very intimate, really. It's like a mother or a father and a child.
yeah. Well, being there in the end over 20 years of time, that kind of thing occurs. There was a time I can remember when I can remember quite clearly he was twisting a woman, and he turned to me and he kind of caught my eye and he said, "You're going to do this. Watch." And so he did this twist on this woman. He was actually, no, he was chiding. There was another Indian teacher there, and he said, "We'll see if she catches." In other words, me. We'll see if Stephanie catches.
Mm.
And he did this adjustment on a student in standing Marajasana. And did I catch what he did? And it was kind of like, yes, pretty much. In
Mhm.
other words, what I noticed was he kind of held her in a position and then twisted himself.
Mm.
He kept his spine, he kept his sternum and spine absolutely in line with hers. So his had to go along with hers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it wasn't using the arms to twist somebody where you get to stand still and you add a bit more pressure onto their body to get them to twist further.
Mhm.
So the question was, did I see how he did that, how he worked with his own body to bring the effectiveness of the pose? And again, apart from that comment, we'll see if she gets this. No words.
Mhm.
And there was another time, and I've said this in actually a few other interviews. There was a time once often when the Iyengers would walk into the therapy class, you knew they walked into the therapy class because the emotional energy of the place just erupted. It just hiked
Mhm.
up and up and up because they would come in literally at high volume, at high voice, and do this and do that,
Mhm.
commanding and controlling the whole room, and everyone kind of like.
Mhm.
But as the evening would wear on, and I started to recognize this as a pattern, as the evening would wear on, I once, well, more than once actually, it took me a while to recognize this is what I was witnessing. He'd be working on a student and he'd be humming to himself a tune, a
Interesting.
melody.
Wow. I
Yeah,
never heard that, and I've never heard of him doing
yeah,
that.
yeah. So it's these kind of things that, I mean, technically there's nothing that he doesn't know. But to be honest with you, it's all been written down, it's all been printed or videoed because other teachers have given those points, technical points. If you
Mhm.
look on the internet now, everyone does those advanced poses that he did, all
Mhm.
this kind of stuff. And so it's kind of like that's not the marvelous, amazing thing about him. Sometimes it's, just a single thing, the whole word of alignment, just goes through, cascades down through layers and layers of importance.
Mhm.
Um, Understanding that your own process is undergoing change. It's not that you are a kind of an entity to be filled up with Iyengar yoga. It's
Mhm.
actually that you are to be emptied out of yourself, and that is Iyengar yoga. So like I was saying, there's this undoing, unknowing,
Yeah.
and so unspoken aspect to it, which I, come now, even more and more now that I'm not there, is becomes more and more important. So,
Mhm.
those times when he was humming to himself, he was obviously, in a state of his own inner contentment
Mhm.
and harmony with doing this work,
Yeah.
which he wasn't you didn't hear his words or anything like he was just working on people. I mean, a
Yeah.
comment would come, no, I need the orange belt.
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
orange belt. So that kind of thing, practical necessity needs to get an orange belt. So, and then you'd watch what he'd do with that.
Mhm.
And I remember once there was someone had bought those little bricks that swimming pool toys. They're
Mhm.
little foam bricks about this big. They bought a whole box of them, and they were half of them were red ones and half of them were dark blue ones. the Iyengar's immediately pounced on these and started to use them. They became behind people's hearts. They ended up in various places. This very small brick. I can remember one time when I was working with a student, there was a crowd of people around, and he asked for a brick that was down there on the floor. It was a red one. It was picked up. It was used. It was applied. The next day, same student who was there for every medical class. Oh, brick. And Guruji would kind of like he reduced his words. Like he would sometimes just say brick, brick.
Mm-hmm.
You had to know what that meant.
Mm-hmm.
And someone bought one of those bricks. It was one of the blue ones, but they were the same thing. It was just different color.
Okay.
And he said, no, it has to be the red one. He was irate that they hadn't noticed what had been used last time. But two, that quality of a thing
Oh.
is as important as the dimension, the measuring and measuring a length and a height and a weight. And we are very good at analyzing a thing according to those things. Our Western mind has trained itself in being analytical. We will look into a thing well and to decide what is the truth. That's not what the Indian mind does. So for him, the color of it was important. And it's not just whether you remembered that he had a different color last time. It was actually that the color of it was different, even though the part of you is screaming out, oh, but that doesn't make any difference. It's the same brick. It makes all the difference. It's all the difference because it's him that is applying it. And it's him that is taking the student through this healing process. And yes, the color counts. There's all kinds of ways upon which you can see it, but it's another one of those unspoken. You can't measure that kind of teaching. You can't quantify it.
Yeah.
I mean, there were times when he sort of said, I know, no, it has to be a 10 kg weight. Bring a 10 kg weight. He's naming it by the weight and by specifics and that kind of thing. But so often the remarkable thing is that, a lot of it truly is an experienced knowledge. It was I gave a talk in Sydney a couple of years ago, and I talked about him in terms of him being very heuristic. In other words, entirely self-taught. That his knowledge has come out of that process. And it has always occurred to me that the depth of his knowledge, it isn't, yes, it is his practice, because you can't separate the two out. Definitely it is his practice, but he learned to see and to heal people really because of that, that much experience and practice gave him direct perception of people. He didn't really, so to a certain degree, he had an extraordinary amount of knowledge. We always kind of feel would never attain that body of knowledge. But it was really to do with the fact that somewhere, and probably pretty early, he had really learnt that it was what is going on inside that is important. Sure, yes, of course, could not have been without all that rigorous discipline. Couldn't have been done without all that. All of it mounted up to direct insight into the subject and into people. In terms of pramana, and in terms of the way we learn correct knowledge, pramana, there is agama, which is like we learn because we've read the texts. studied somebody's notes who were in India last year. We studied the sequence that Gita took this class for, or, we look at what is the immune sequence. So this is learning by agama. And then there's anumana, which is that actually much more experiential, where you learn the result of something. There is kind of like doing something, and there is a kind of like what is the actual outcome of that. There's kind of a little bit of reflection that sort of comes back in. It's not just following point by point by point. And then there is ekagra. It's direct, without anumana is inference, without kind of the words and the lists or the texts, the traditional texts, without any of that direct perception. Ekagra. So these are the three forms of pramana. And in a way, I guess it seems to me, because of the rigorousness of his practice, and not just that it was rigorous because any army guy has to train rigorously, but also because of that he was ardent in his endeavor. In his personality, he was ardent. I can remember the first time my mother met him when she came to India once. She said, it was amazing. His whole face moves. Everything about his face moves when you meet him. He's not somebody to kind of like hide himself in any way. But there's this so there's this aspect of his ardent nature that was always present. And that meant that he was a strong teacher. He could really broadcast to people, and that was his ardent nature. Then there was the rigorousness of his own practice. But it was actually that process of that was necessary, but it was that he'd started to notice what was the inner feeling, what was the direct perception coming to him as a result, how he started to feel just the subtlest movement of skin in different places, peculiar for that pose, but not in another. And this pose, that skin will move. Yeah, so this kind of degree of subtlety gave him ekagra insight, gave him insight, really. That understanding that he had gone through that process, and what I'm saying is, yes, he was an ardent practitioner. Yes, he was a rigorous, disciplined man in his practice. But it's all of that was background to actually this inner process that was going on. It gave him an increasingly subtle understanding of yoga. And often it was a situation where, for him, working therapeutically it brought him to the same place that music brings you to.
That's really amazing. Prashant has been talking in my recent interview with him about, and he's mentioned it before, but about Iyengar's yoga and Iyengar yoga.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I once made a comment to Guruji, actually, and it was a little bit pointed. I did come up to him once. It was a class running and I was assisting, and everyone, they were going through their standing poses or something like that. And yeah, they were kind of like really on point. They were really working hard and on point. I did come up to him and I sort of said, what's interesting is that you don't seem to practice your own method, because that's not what I'd see him practice.
Sure, yeah.
And he said, no.
Like, of course not, but that's not what he would need.
No,
Yeah.
no, that is what you do if you have a whole large group of people and you're trying to actually train them. You're trying to literally start them to be cultivated. You're starting to dig the furrows in the paddock. That's what you have to do to get the ground and the soil turned over and for light to start to get in there. But but that's not actually yoga practice yet. That's
Right.
getting cultivated.
Getting
That's the
cultivated.
way I kind of see it. Um, but one should never be foolish about assuming that you've finished that cultivating stage.
Yeah. I don't think
As
I will in this lifetime.
well, that question about yourself is actually that kind of that's a form of doubt.
Mm.
Am I at this level yet, or am I this far progress? Where am I? Have I progressed? Am I getting any better? Not is my poses getting any better? Well, you can see that. You either can bend the knee now or not. Am I progressing on my path? And it's a question in your mind that you're quite often bound to be asking yourself, am I changing? Am I getting, we do that. Am I changing in myself? Am I getting any better? And
Mhm.
it's almost as though actually that's not to be asked.
Mm.
There's a very famous, this is a bit of an outtake. I'm diverting a bit away from directly about experiences in Pune, but there's a very early teaching in a collection of texts, early Buddhist texts called the Udana. And
Mhm.
I think it's the opening chapter, and the chapter is called Bahir of the Bark Garment. And it was about a man who had practiced ardently in the forest by himself. And he had this perplexing question about, was he getting anywhere? And
Mhm.
he thought, because he had heard about Gautama the Buddha, and he had this idea that he probably would know whether he was getting somewhere, whether he was progressing on his path. And so he made a long journey and got to where the Buddha was and his gathering was. And he circumambulated so many times and he asked his question. And a very famous teaching came out because what the Buddha replied was, it's a very famous teaching, was in the sitting, only the sitting. In the standing, only the standing. In the walking, only the walking. There should not be these questions about progress.
That's beautiful.
Mm,
Mm.
it's lovely. It a little bit reminds me of that kind of process that I guess, Iyengar must have gone in. So, to be honest with you, I can only talk about aspects of his practice that Stephanie, I'm reflecting upon.
Sure. Yeah.
And I don't know, I think if you would ask him about his process, he wouldn't really give an answer.
Yeah.
He would give a lot of answers about what you needed to do, but not
Mm.
about what he was actually doing. We did once ask him, I can remember being there, and about his clock, because he always had a stopwatch with him,
Mhm.
and kind of a stopwatch is usually used for kind of some competitive thing. It's used in sports. They want to check who got there first or how long
Right.
it did take to cover that distance.
Mhm.
All this kind of thing. And it's kind of, one could sort of think, you set the clock to make sure that you do your 10-minute Shirshasana. Or,
Mhm.
if you're just learning, you do your 3 minutes. You
Mm.
stay there for 3 minutes and you have your clock in front of you and you pitch yourself up against this timer. But he didn't use it in that way, his answer about it. And I can recall that he might have given this answer after he once came up out of chair kapotasana. He'd been in that chair kapotasana for more than 18 minutes. He was already in it when I started timing him, and he came out of it after 18 minutes.
Mm.
We can barely, even chair kapotasana, we can barely bear 5 minutes.
Right.
It's, it's like, oh, the tiger, you meet the tiger in that
Yeah.
pose. He said, because he had a very regular practice.
Mhm.
He would kind of concentrate on a pose, work with a pose for, he'd work at that pose for 9 months, year and a half, he would be regularly doing that pose on a Thursday in his practice.
Okay.
Yeah, for 1.5 years before he seemed to move on to be incorporating some other pose or not. So that long, long time of consistency in his practice, I don't think we have that grounding. We a little bit caught up in perhaps teachers wanting to give a class and knowledge and poses. And so we do, there's a certain amount, some schools follow standing pose week, forward bend week, that kind of system. So you do get a sort of a consistency, but we just get these little chunks. People tend to kind of copy that when they come to do their own practice. And they will probably, when they go back home after Puna, copy their Puna practices and then move on to, maybe they go for a workshop with another senior teacher, then they will copy or they will practice those practices. Whereas for him, it was much more like the way that he would return to a pose and return to a pose was more like a ritual, more like a devotion, more like puja, because he was kind of repeating, not the mantra, he was repeating the position. But the watch, yes, yeah. Because you realize he always does this pose at a certain time. And then I was there long enough to have witnessed him, what appeared to have been, no longer going back to some poses. But with the clock, what would happen? He asked, or we asked, why, what are you using the clock for? And his answer was, so that each time I do this pose, I can check whether my resistance rises up at the same time.
Oh,
It
interesting.
always rises up after a certain period of time. And
That's
what
interesting.
stage you surrender into it and does another resistance, and when in the
Oh my
probably what was 20 minutes in a pose, when does that rise up?
So he would check when he was feeling
Yeah,
that
that's what
check
his
to see
clock
how
was.
long he was able to surrender in it as well.
Yeah, or when some resistance and some, I think you might have mentioned emotions, when the emotions rise up in the practice.
Any reflections or memorable moments of the family life of the Iyengars?
Cricket.
Oh yeah.
Involved with the Iyengar family was to know about the cricket. I used to quite enjoy the fact that, being a dual nationality, Australia puts up a really good cricket team, and so does New Zealand. And they are often batting against the Indian team. Of course, in India, cricket is more than a sport, religion. So you get involved in the cricket. I did once, I was blessed to go accompany, along with another student, Geeta, to Tirupati. Got to take 3 of the pujas rituals that are part of the rituals in the big temple in Tirupati, and staying overnight in a hotel and then, traveling back. That was really quite special. I can remember once there's an ancient, I remember watching him play with his grandchildren, and there was one time, there was an ancient game where you get 3 sticks and you rest one on the ground at a kind of an angle like this. Yeah. So there's this part sticking up. Yeah. And what you do is you have a third stick, you whack that bit that's sticking up, and it flips it up in the air, and you have to then swipe it away. And
Oh,
his grandson, one of his grandsons, was trying to do this and couldn't do it. And this boy was, I don't know, about 8 or 10. And he was trying it and trying it. This was in the courtyard. And then Guruji stepped up. And by this stage, I think Guruji must have been in his 80s. Guruji hits it here. He took the stick off him and he just went, bang.
oh my gosh.
I was impressed.
I bet his grandson was too.
I rather suspect probably the grandson was quite used to the family where he was just really very good at everything.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah.
That incredible
Of
dexterity
course.
and accuracy to do that tricky game is like, wow, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm,
Oh, that's funny.
no slowpoke.
I oh, go ahead.
No, it's okay. Yeah.
Well, I recently interviewed Savita and Vanita. They talked a lot about their mother's cooking and Gita's cooking and sort
Mm,
of family dishes. And did you
yeah.
have opportunity to eat with the family as well?
Oh, yeah,
Mm.
yeah. I was involved in, when I was in the practice room in the morning and then in the afternoon, I'd be in the library having something to do with the production of some of their publications. And then in the evening, I'd be in class or assisting in
Mhm.
class. This is a part that's, it's a sort of 16-hour day of training.
Mhm.
But when we were at that stage where we had to kind of like work to midnight because it was a festival or it was we were hitting a deadline on one of the publications or something like that, then yes, the food would be brought out from the house
Mhm.
and we'd all stop and down tools and sit around and have something to eat. And it's quite interesting as a comment that also I heard about, I think, no, Gita made this comment about that when Vanita got married, she had to learn to cook with 3 different spices.
Mm. Then what she was used to
Yeah,
cooking?
because it wasn't the Iyengar
Oh,
family,
okay.
it was the Sridhar family.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So that meant traditionally the Sridhar family would cook with certain spices. The Iyengar family would cook with certain spices.
Oh,
And
interesting.
this was a given. This is what that family traditionally, that was it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And Vanita, when she got married, Kanita was, Gita was like, Vanita had to cook with 3 different spices. And I just sort of think like, we go to the supermarket now or the shops and we discovered that they've come with some new form of chutney, caramelized onion or whatever. And
Right.
it's the latest thing, oh, I'll try that.
Yeah, sure.
That's not how they're
Oh.
goes. And I can remember one time Guruji said, you Westerners, you all have to, why do you all taste your food while you're cooking?
Mm.
Because we do that. We
Yes.
test if it's right yet.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas for them, it would be absolutely fixed how much of this spice, that spice, salt, this
Mm-hmm.
much quantity and that much quantity of this and that. There would be no need to taste it.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, this is what's wrong with you. You all need to taste your food as you're doing the cooking. Interesting, huh?
It's very interesting.
That's a completely different outlook on life and understanding on what supports you. That's the home base. None of this buying the latest. Australia is a country that is built up through immigration. So we've had wave after wave after wave of food from Italy and from Greece and from Lebanon. And then, of course, Thai, Chinese food, Afghani food. The
Mhm.
Afghanis came with their camels during the gold rush. There are herds of camels out in the Australian desert behind by the Afghan people. And there in the smallest shanty outback town in Australia, there will be a Chinese restaurant. because the Chinese came with the gold rush as well. And so then they remained and they set up. So there will be a Chinese restaurant in every single outback town. And the good thing about a Chinese restaurant that you find in an outback town is it gives you an alternative to pub food,
Mhm.
which is the only other thing on offer. But it does mean that you get vegetables.
Yeah.
Yeah, at least.
Mhm.
But in India, the food is important. They offer some of the food that they've cooked to the animals outside as an offering to other beings every meal. And they when they have a puja, they throw ghee, teal oil, sesame seeds, probably rice into the fire of the puja. And this is kind of like, and a symbolically, the sort of like the cooking that happens. They don't believe in cooking when there's a heat above. They only believe in cooking with a heat that's below. The thing is not on, is just incomprehensible. Yes, they will cook with heat underneath. So the food, the dishes that would be made, I believe for the Iyengar family, that on their wedding day, they have to produce 9 different rice dishes. And that's because that was the kind of food that could be produced with the land, that and a
Mhm.
lot of coconut could be produced with the land enough for the village, because always this is way, way, way back in ancient times, and that the cooking hasn't kind of like really kind of gone, you haven't gone to different styles since then. It's
Right.
a version of that, and it's carried forward. And it's a style kind of cooking that you get in South India will be
Mhm.
quite different to what you get in northern India and up in the Ganges River Plateau. And it's kind of like it's all according to what was in the nourishment available on the land. That's
Mhm.
what the tradition of cooking would be born out on.
Yeah, that makes
This is
sense.
what would nourish the people, the body, the mind.
Hmm.
You know. And so when Guruji said, that's what's wrong with you people, you all have to taste your food while you're cooking.
Hmm.
It's like, what on earth is nourishing you people?
Okay, so I want to ask you a question about how we can carry on the Iyengar tradition. For new teachers, and not just new teachers, but new students, what advice would you offer for keeping Guruji's legacy alive in their daily teaching and in their own development?
A new teacher, so they've obviously got some years already under the belt,
Hmm.
to make that journey to India. And it's not that Mr. Iyengar is there now, but
Hmm.
it's something about, it's a yatra, it's a journey.
Hmm.
A yatra is where they actually bring the gods out of the temples and parade them through the village, and they actually get travel along in carts, and they're taken from one place to another place,
Hmm.
and it's seen as like a pilgrimage.
Hmm.
And it's also a bit like, for the Muslim population, that journey to Mecca, um,
Hmm.
they undertake, that they vow to undertake at least once in their life. So it's got this quality of actually, I mean, everyone will take it and be able to express that in their own way, but it's got that quality. It has that effect on people. That so there's that aspect. There's a kind of like symbolically, it's not to do one of the things is that the Iyengars are the holders to the use of the name, the certification process. So and the thing is, and there's a requirement that you do go to Pune if you are a teacher so many times within so many years and have learnt that way. There's that, and that is actually on a very worldly level. And for those reasons, actually, people could get a bit resentful about, just to maintain my certificate, etc., etc. And yet you find, I often hear the story of people having doubts about doing that, and yet when they go, they almost weep as they step through the gate again. Because there is some dynamic, as I don't know what you call it, it is the center of the mandala that we are all connected to. There are many excellent senior teachers around the world, very experienced in teaching, also capable of commanding a hall of hundreds in big conventions and things like that, and not actually a member of the Iyengar family. I'm talking about, senior teachers who have been out there doing their work, running their schools, bringing up their own students, training their own students. That is important. I know that they have brought in now one of the biggest changes is that there is a mentorship process. So you've actually got this connection to someone more experienced than you. That there is, so you do properly. The system is now formulated to place you in a lineage rather than in acquiring a certificate, though that is there. I'm not saying it's not there, but to do that, you are positioned within a lineage. Considering the way that the system carries on, so much of it remote from India itself, one could kind of think, well, maybe it could exist without necessary. Why go to Pune? Is it necessary to go to Pune? It seems that there is that as we open deeper into our practice, the opening that being belonging to a lineage that goes back hundreds of years, it goes beyond Guruji. It's a traditional thing. You're meant to be able to name your lineage at least through 3 steps. That's a traditional thing. There is something kind of important about that there's someone there in front of you, and there's someone there beside you, and there's someone there behind you, rather than it being a kind of like a show up. It's a bit like a driver's license test. Show up, do your answer the questions, do your test, and there's somebody there with a clipboard saying yes or no, it's good or bad. There is actually a relationship with your mentor. You don't have a relationship with the driving.
That's right.
You could try, and I'm sure many have tried to charm their way through their test.
Yes. Yeah, that's really good advice, and that is really important that we have that mentorship and adherence to the lineage.
Very much part of other old spiritual traditions that are still being carried on today. A lot of the Buddhist tradition is still being carried on today. They may have another word for it, but they've got a similar thing. Within Buddhism, there is a system of what is known as Kalyana Mitrata. It means actually fierce friend, strong friend. That is a system that works within Buddhism. It's not necessarily the teaching monk who is your Kalyana Mitrata. One particular school of Buddhism that I know about, that somebody wanting to be ordained has to be in a good working relationship. It means working with the doubts and the uncertainties, not just what you know and how many hours you spend sitting cross-legged. Actually working through the whole process, that there has to be 2 kms for a person to actually be accepted for ordination. You have to have that relationship going on. So I sort of see the mentorship process as being as closer approximation to that as can be done. And, it's not the only modern day old tradition that is getting carried forward into modern day times. Other traditions are doing that. The Quakers have their own system of it. With the contact that I've had with a teacher who is Catholic and every year travels to the UK to be part of some kind of ongoing training process whereby she is the KM for some people. She is the friend slash counselor for people going into the Catholic Church through becoming more and more committed into that process. And that's happening in this very day and age. It's not just what happened hundreds of years ago. So all kinds of systems are upgrading and bringing ancient traditions into a more relevancy. And within Iyengar yoga, it's not actually a religion, but as Guruji says, it's the way you practice your religion. Yeah, because in fact, the Iyengar family themselves, devotees of Venkatesh, of Tirupati, they have their own family lineage, but in terms of the method of Iyengar yoga, and I tend to believe it's that kind of system and doing it in a way in which there is relationship is the best way of carrying it forward in modern day times. Now that Guruji is actually not there, Gita is not there, but Prashant is. And he is the son of Guruji. And then you sort of think, well, I remember Guruji saying that his guru, Krishnamacharya, never really taught him much, but he did initiate him into yoga. My mother's Dharma teacher, who is now passed, once made a interesting part of a poem he wrote. He says, gratitude or homage to all of my gurus, imperfect though they are, good enough to show me the way. But it's kind of like that, it's a human transmission that goes on. Yes, in the end, you have to do the work on a sticky mat, which generally only fits one person. You lie down on it. It fits a human body, but not more. So in the end, yes, it's you alone on that mat that is doing the practice, but it is within, you are lying on a mat in a mandala, and you might feel that way out in New Zealand or Australia, you're on the very outskirts of that mandala. And it's kind of like, you could say that Prashant and Sunita and Abhijato and them are really close to the center, but actually, deeper in is actually Guruji, and deeper in actually is T. Krishnamacharya and Ramakrishna Mohan Brahmachari, who was the yoga teacher to Krishnamacharya, mountains in Nepal. There is a lineage that is going back. For modern day Western terms, that is the mentorship process. And I'm sure it will evolve also. People will find out what aspects of that works, what aspects of that doesn't really work. From what I can tell, mostly have just kind of used it as a change of wording for the certificate process. It'll have to go through a process. It will have to go through a process.
Well, Stephanie, this has been a very rich conversation. I really appreciate it. I hope that we can talk again because I have a lot more questions already. I hope you would come back. I hope we can meet again sometime. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to On the Light. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Today, I leave you with this quote from BKS Iyengar from Light on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Asana has two facets, pose and repose. Pose is the artistic assumption of a position. Reposing in the pose means finding the perfection of a pose and maintaining it, reflecting in it with penetration of the intelligence and with dedication. Thank you for listening. Namaskar.